Denim Couch Podcast. Ooh, whoa, ooh, whoa.
The 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s with Steph with an F.
Hi guys, welcome to the Denim Couch Podcast, where we chill on this denim couch and talk about the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm Stephanie Tanner. Welcome. Hey guys, it's Stephanie Tanner with the Denim Couch Podcast. All right, today's episode, we are chatting with Frank Hunsaker. Frank is incredible, and his story, I don't want this intro to be that long because his story is all you really need to listen to. It's very intense, incredible, and I'm just really happy that he was kind enough to share it with us. One thought I had this week is just how blessed we are in this time, in this decade. These people had to really go through a lot, especially with all the wars that happened at this time in the early 1910s, 1940s. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, so many wars. And these men fought so bravely and basically sacrificed their lives in many cases for other people and did what they had to do. And we don't have to deal with that today. My husband and I went and saw 1917 last night. And first off, it was incredible because of the way that they shot it to look like one take. In one scene, one continual scene. But not only that, you felt like you were really there. And I was scared, so scared the entire time. It was an amazing movie, but I was really scared the whole time for the characters, and I felt like I was there. So I just am really grateful for just the fact that I don't have to go through that, and that at this point, the men that I love don't have to go through that. I'm just ultimately really grateful and respect these men that did this, and Frank is one of these men. And so with that, let's just dive in. And my first question for you is, can you tell me a little bit more about your name?
Well, that's an interesting question, and do you mind me calling you my dear?
I love that.
Because my last name, of course, not common at all until I went to college at Brigham Young University in the mid-60s, and I found out that Hunsaker is a very common name in Utah and Idaho, and even in California somewhat, but in Oregon, no, it wasn't common, and particularly not common was my real first name, which is Isaac. I didn't want anyone to know that was my real first name. I used to, in fact, deny it if somebody would ask me. And that's interesting because when I got older, and particularly when I started broadcasting, I used the name Isaac, only Isaac. I didn't use my last name. I was just Isaac on the air. And I love that, and but I love the name Isaac now, and in fact, a lot of my good friends call me Isaac, and I like that. Whereas in high school, even in college initially, I would never use that name. If I was either Frank or Franklin if I had to use my full name, but now I like the name Isaac, and not embarrassed at all to use it. So that was a long answer to your question, but anyway.
What was life like back in the 60s?
Oh, yes. you have to realize, my dear, that I graduated high school in 1960 and went off to college for 4 years, graduated from Brigham Young University in 1964. And Brigham Young University, I know this will shock you, is extremely conservative. I am not. And I stayed conservative Brigham Young University in 1964 to the University of California at Berkeley Law School. in '64. And that was the difference between night and day because, of course, again, BYU was very conservative and very controlled insofar as, what you could do and could not do. Whereas Berkeley was just the opposite. And I loved Berkeley. I just thought it was a great place, and I liked the atmosphere. And, of course, 1964 was the year of the free speech movement of Berkeley, which is where students would form groups, and then they'd have demonstrations, and they'd utter profanities just to test things. It was called the free speech movement, and that was the right to say whatever you wanted, wherever you wanted. And so it was quite lots of riots. Of course, the Vietnam War started, and lots of riots at Berkeley. But so I went from this, again, from BYU to University of California at Berkeley in '64, '65, and that was the difference between night and day. And I got married in 1965, and so that was a big change. And then I left law school after 1 year. I didn't like it, and got drafted in 1965. And instead of going into the Army, I decided I wanted to be an officer. And so I ended up going to Officers Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia for the U.S. Marine Corps, and got my officer's commission. And then I ended up going into flight and became a naval flight officer in a supersonic F-4 Phantom jet in the Marine Corps. And went through training in '65, '66, '67, and in 1967, right after Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, I went to Vietnam. But before I got to Vietnam, I spent several months in Japan training and with a squadron there, and then I ended up going into Vietnam in January of 1968. And 1968 was a monumental year in America because that was the year when the Vietnam War was really escalated, and there were lots of demonstrations here in the United States, and it was a very unpopular war. And I spent all of 1968 from January until Christmas of '68 in Vietnam, flying missions for the Marine Corps. And in May of that year, May 1st of '68, my pilot and I were shot down in our jet doing a bombing mission, and we had a miraculous ejection from our aircraft that exploded under us. It was hit by anti-enemy aircraft fire, and it exploded because we were carrying bombs on when we were in this bombing run, and we had to eject. And my pilot and I, not together but separately, landed in the middle of an enemy, North Vietnamese Army battalion, which is a large force of enemy soldiers, and had to, and as they were trying to rescue us, as our friendly forces were trying to rescue us in that situation, they had to leave without us because they were going to get shot down by the enemy, and so we had to escape and evade for an hour and a half before we were rescued, and it was quite a life-changing experience for me. And then I came home from the Vietnam War at Christmas time in 1968, and the Vietnam War and Vietnam veterans were very unpopular. It was nothing like it is today, when our armed forces return home from battles, and they're honored, and there are parades and whatnot. Not so when we returned home from Vietnam. We were you kind of just didn't even announce that you were a Vietnam vet. And I went back to Berkeley to resume my law school training in 1970, and spent 2 years then at Berkeley getting my law degree. And those were tumultuous years because lots of demonstrations on campuses around the country of the Vietnam and Cambodian War efforts. And so, again, Vietnam vets were kind of looked down upon and maybe even despised. And so those were different times. And then I got my law degree in 1972 and moved to Portland, Oregon. And just before that, my late wife and I had our first child, Kimberly, in 1969. I moved up here to Portland, and I joined a law firm and practiced law for 30-some years here in Portland. So the 60s were a very tumultuous times for me and very monumental times, graduating high school, college, going into the Marine Corps, going to war, just really, and starting right after the 60s and the early 70s, starting my law career. We were just not, we were deemed to be kind of like, bad guys because we served in this unpopular war. I, again, was drafted, and then I voluntarily went to Officers Candidate School and got my officer's commission.
Mm-hmm.
I did not try to avoid going into the military once I was drafted. A lot of my friends did. They did everything possible to avoid the draft, but I was drafted and figured I'm going to make the most of it, and I did. And I had 6 years, very good years, except for that 1 year in 1968 in the military. A lot of great experiences. Started our family in Southern California, where I was stationed after Vietnam. And, it was a very positive time, except for that 1 year. There was just very tumultuous times. And as I watched the special that was on TV this last year, the Ken Burns special on the Vietnam War, it was very moving for me to watch it. And also I went to a lecture that Ken Burns gave. And it was just very different because, the times were very different in 68 when I was in Vietnam than they are now. And it was nice because when I went to this lecture, that he asked for all the Vietnam vets to stand up. And I had this big auditorium where there were hundreds of people, or thousands. And we all stood up and people clapped and shook our hands.
Wow.
And that brought tears to my eyes because, believe me, we didn't get that when we got home from Vietnam. So it was very different. I remember when the Desert Storm War, when those warriors came home and they were greeted with parades and whatnot. One of my buddies who had been in Vietnam with me called me on the telephone, and he said to me, "Isn't this different? How does it make you feel? How we got treated. There were no parades, and now what they're doing." And I said, I'm glad they're doing it for these returning veterans. But it still brings tears to my eyes when I think about, what we went through. And I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I understand the times and what people, how unpopular the war was. But it was just sad that you were kind of treated certainly not as a hero in any way, by a large segment of our society, but as somebody who was kind of despised, having participated in the Vietnam War. 68 was also a very, very tumultuous times here in the United States, because that was the year that Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated, and it was just, you wondered what was going on. Here we were over fighting this war for our country. And yet there was this strong partisan divide in the country over the war and the unpopularity. So it was a very, very interesting time.
What did you do for fun in the 60s?
So much depends on where I was or what I was doing. What did I do for fun in high school, from which I graduated in 60? Just had really fun times, lived life to its fullest, and was a hellion. Had my first love in life, and just really great times. And then I went off to college, and I worked hard and did well. Still had some fun back at BYU. Didn't always follow the rules, but had fun. and met my late wife there. Then, of course, when I went in the military, things really changed, and particularly when I went to Vietnam, it was scary. I entered Vietnam the day that the 10th Offensive, which was the big offensive by the enemy that kind of turned the tide of the war, turned our country against the war, where the enemy invaded a lot of our bases, and that was my first day in country.
Wow.
And we would get bombed daily or nightly by rockets, and it was scary. It was frightening. And then I was flying air support missions for our ground troops. If you ever saw the movie Forrest Gump, you'll recall when he was in Vietnam, there was a scene where he was out fighting with his buddies, his unit, and they got surrounded by enemy soldiers and they had to call in an airstrike. And the planes that they called in were, in fact, the Marines and the F-4s that I was flying in, where there was just a two-seat supersonic jet aircraft, and we'd fly these hair-raising bombing missions where we'd start at 8,000 feet and dive down at a 45, 50-degree angle.
Wow.
And drop bombs at 200 feet and then fly off. And anyway, those were scary. And I'd be the first to admit that I was not I did not consider myself a career Marine. And so after that horrible incident on May 1st when they got shot down, and I was lucky to even get out alive, I was anxious to get back home. And of course, I was only halfway through my mission with, my fellow aviators, and it was just a real experience. And I had my first and only reunion here in I think it was the early 90s, and we all got together, and it was just fun to see some of these people that I hadn't seen since 1968. And it's hard to believe that it's now been 50 years. 50 plus years since that all happened. But so anyway, what did I do for fun? Lots of different things. In high school, just enjoying the rock and roll, and in college, more rock and roll and just having fun as college students only can. And then in the Marine Corps, just to kind of trying to relieve the stress of being in a war situation, and learning, how to fly and whatnot, and flying combat missions, entirely different from high school. And I got a lot of gray hairs from that. In fact, I still get together with one of my high school buddies. Every couple of months we'll get together for lunch. And he and I used to, when we had dances in high school, he and I used to do what was called a sword dance, where everybody, all the students would gather around us, and we'd be out in the middle of the circle doing our sword dance. It was just fun, and we still laugh and reminisce about it. And the sock hops that we had. And high school was a lot of fun, as was college. But I really had a lot more fun in high school than I did in college. I think I was still kind of just having more fun than being serious about studies. Even though I did well in studies in high school, I did a lot better in college because I realized I had to get good grades to go on and achieve what I wanted to achieve with my life. So,
do you have any favorite memories from the 60s?
Well, I had 4 sisters and no brothers, 2 older sisters and 2 younger sisters. And people still, when I tell them that, say, "Oh, that explains it." Because my parents never made me do anything inside the house. I never washed dishes. I never made beds. I did a lot of outside work, lawn work and whatnot, but never inside. And as a result, I have memories. I loved teasing my sisters, particularly my 2 younger sisters, Alice and my sister Linda. Loved teasing them because they were younger. My 2 older sisters they tried to keep me on the straight and narrow because they were great students. And I was accused oftentimes of not upholding the Hunsaker family tradition. Great years growing up, lots of fun, and I participated in lots of sports. I loved girls, and just had a great life growing up. But I also learned something growing up, And unfortunately, I learned this mostly in grade school and high school, and a little bit in college, and I'm almost embarrassed to even admit this, but I'm going to tell you because it did have a big impact on my life. I was today what they would call probably a bully, in that I have a trait in which I have low self-esteem. And so to make up for that, I love teasing other people. And unfortunately, in high school and early college and in grade school, making fun of people that I felt weren't up to snuff socially. And I would find those who were awkward or challenged in any way, and I would tease and I would bully. And I did that a lot in high school in particular. And my first year in law school at Berkeley, one day the newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, ran a big front page article on a young man who committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he was a high school student. And I remember this, it had such a great impact on me because I read the article. And in this article, the young man left a suicide note. And that note said, "I am tired." I have to be careful I don't start crying telling you this, but I'm showing it because it did have a big impact on me. He left a suicide note. He said, "I am tired of going home from school every day and looking in the mirror and saying, 'Why me, Lord? Why do I have to be teased and taunted?'" And believe me, I had been one of those who would tease and taunt. I would make fun of you if your eyes were crossed or if you had a bad complexion or whatever. Not that I was perfect, but that was my way of making myself feel bigger. And that really hit me between the eyes that what a bad person I had been. And so I was always anxious to go back to my first high school reunion and find a couple of these people that I had teased so incessantly, and just say to them, "I'm sorry I was that way." And unfortunately, neither one of them, there were two of them in particular, were still alive. But every chance I ever got after that, to this day, whenever I get a chance to talk with youth, and I told it to my own kids, don't belittle people, because to belittle is to be little. And I used to say that to my kids when they'd go off to school when they were in high school. You know, to belittle is to be little. And I try to tell kids, don't bully. You'll regret it. And I do regret it.
What was the style like back in the 60s? What did you wear?
Ever heard of desert boots? They were suede high-top shoes, and they were like a boot. They were very popular. They were lightweight, and they still make them, yeah. But they were very popular when I was in high school and college. And we also had trousers or pants that had like a little belt, Ivy League type belt that they had on the back. You know, but we didn't have T-shirts then that were, you know, that you would wear as a shirt. Now, you know, every T-shirt has something on it, a logo or something. Back then, a T-shirt was truly something like an undergarment. There was a group of people we called greasers who would roll their sleeves up if you saw grease. That was a style back when I was in high school, and we loved to dance. We do the bop and the swing and the dirty bop. Lots of fun. And cruising Broadway and hot cars and just stuff like that, just like you'd see if you watched American Graffiti.
What were some popular activities?
I loved rock and roll radio, and in fact, that's how I ended up becoming a radio announcer in later years during my practice of law. Is that I determined when I was in high school I wanted to be a radio disc jockey. And so when I was in college, I seriously considered going to broadcasting school, but instead I went to law school. And but at one point in my life, in my career, professional career, I decided, doggone it, this is when I was probably in my 50s, I've always wanted to be a disc jockey, and I found out there was a station well, there were several stations in Portland, Oregon, that had volunteer announcers, and one of them was a jazz station. And so I went down and introduced myself to the general manager of the station, and this was in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And so I'd really love to go on the air, and he trained me for several months. And then I went on the air as first time I went on the air, it was from 10 in the evening until 2 in the morning.
Wow.
And where I could do little damage. I ended up ultimately graduating to doing a Friday morning show every Friday morning. But I loved it. It was a culmination of a lifelong dream of mine to be a radio disc jockey, and I enjoyed it. And I had a lot of people who would call me and tell me that they really enjoyed my shows. So that was a very good years for me doing that. And also practicing law, but it was so different from practicing law to go and sit in a radio booth and just, kind of spin the records I wanted to spin and answer phones and whatnot. It was a lot of fun. I can tell somebody can ask me about my career, and I can tell them that, about going to Berkeley, and then about going to the Marine Corps, and about flying in a supersonic jet and getting shot down in Vietnam, and then going to law and arguing a case before the United States Supreme Court in 1989. And then I'll mention, and I also was a radio announcer for 15 years or so in the 1980s and 90s. And you know what most people will be most interested in is my radio career. During my legal career, besides arguing for the U.S. Supreme Court, I handled a case in which I represented 7 mothers who had given birth to children out of wedlock, and they wanted to challenge a law that was passed in Oregon in 1989 that opened up what were called sealed adoption records, and it was Oregon was one of the first states in the country to enact such a law. And of course, Nancy and I, my first wife and I, had 5 adopted children, and I love being an adoptive parent. I felt very strongly about adoptions, very pro-adoption. But I also felt strongly that this law that was enacted by Oregonians was unfair to birth mothers, because these birth mothers had been promised confidentiality. All of them had instances where they had placed their child for adoption because of the way the child was born out of wedlock or whatever, mm-hmm. and they hadn't told anybody mm-hmm. in their own families. And now their records were being opened up where the adopted child could, once an adult, could find out the identity of the birth parents and then contact them if they wanted. And so I on behalf of these women, challenged this law. And it was a very hard-fought battle, and it was in the Portland Oregonian newspaper, page articles about it. Some of the national publications ran articles about it. I was in Rolling Stone magazine, two issues of it. They interviewed me about it, and I was on the Today Show one morning, interviewed by Matt Lauer on air, and so those were exciting times. I think that was probably the highlight of my legal career, just because it was a case that I really felt strongly about, and it went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it was a case that I felt strongly about, and I wanted my children to see that I'm pro-adoption. In fact, some opponents would say, how can you be against this law when you're an adoptive parent yourself? And my response is always, I love to hear about reunions between birth parents and adoptive children, and children who were adopted. But I believe it ought to be a two-way street. This law was not a two-way street. It could be just, an adopted child contacting a birth parent without any notice. So anyway, it was an exciting time, and a case that I really felt strongly about.
How would you compare your childhood or teenage years to today's kids?
That's a tough one. The forces, if you will, the influences on kids today are so different than when I was growing up. Mine was a standard childhood, playing baseball games out at the park and around in the street, and just having fun. And then in high school, having lots of fun. I guess I look at it today and I think, man, with the drugs and whatnot, it's just so different. And I think it's sad that some of those good, fun times that we had when I was growing up, they don't have today because of technology and drugs and whatnot. So I hate to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but very different times.
What made you happy back in the 60s?
Family. My family, both my sisters and mom and dad, even though they were not always the happiest of times, we had some rocky times, I have very fond memories of growing up, and fond memories of my high school years, college years, but more often than not, it would always be my family is what brought me true happiness. Just knowing that I had a good family, a successful family, and yes, we had our ups and downs, but I have grown children now who are very successful, and they have successful families, and that's what makes me happy.
Wow, wasn't that incredible? Jam-packed full of so many things. He really has an incredible life, and if you met him in person, you would know what a joy he is to be around. He's a tease, and a great tease. He is so fun to be around. I always look forward to chatting with Frank, and I always feel really good after any of our conversations because he is such a joy to be around. Just a very, very fun personality. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I sure did. And just the fact that we were able to hear what his experience was like in the 60s and all the crazy things that he went through. I'm just really appreciative of everything that he did and what a great life he has lived. And with that, we'll be chatting next week. See you then. Wait. You can't miss the embarrassing story of the week. No. Okay. It's that time. It's Steph with an F's embarrassing story of the week. Okay, so this week's embarrassing story, I always am driving with my husband and I always ask, what did I do this week that was embarrassing? Because he would know. He's with me a lot of the time, and I always tell him about stupid stuff that I do. So his response was, I think you were pretty normal this week. And yeah, sadly I was. But then I remembered that he forgot about the time in the car this week where I sang many, many wrong lyrics. And I think this is just so normal and regularly occurring that he didn't even consider it. So I am horrible at lyrics, always have been. I remember 8th grade, I got weird looks all the time on the bus from just singing the wrong lyrics. And the problem is I want to sing the song. And sometimes I think I'm singing the right things and I'm not. So it happens a lot. I don't really care, but it is embarrassing when someone points it out. They should just let me sing whatever words I want. Anyways, so that's my short story for embarrassing stories this week, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Talk to you next time. Bye.
If you came here for mental health help, please go visit your doctor. If you're looking for some mental health tips, Dr. Daniel Amen is someone I follow. I love what he has to say and offer. I think his website is brainhealthassessment.com, and he just has some awesome checklist items that go over brain health habits that you should be doing to have better brain health. I want to say there's like 5 to 10 items, and if you have those, if you're working on those habits and trying to improve them to improve your brain health, you'll also improve your happiness level, because brain health equals mental health. So keep your brains happy and healthy, and check out Dr. Daniel Amen. This is not sponsored. I just really like what he has to say, and I think it's really beneficial. I think it can help a lot of people. It's actually very matter of fact, kind of obvious, but yet we neglect so many of these habits daily. And I do feel like, if you're feeling unhappy, that may be one of the reasons you're unhappy, because you're neglecting your brain health, which is also your mental health. And trying to improve these habits could really help. So check him out. If you have any stories from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, please get in contact with me. Let's chat. I want nothing more than to chat about the past. I want nothing more than to chat about the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you have any specific questions that I'm not asking that you would like to know about these eras while interviewing these people, please let me know. I would love some advice, and I would love your input. So what would you guys like to know?